Hey, Dave Furry here. Welcome to this series of videos about using the Scenic Express scenery products. Today I'm going to show you some of the products that Scenic Express offers and how best to use them. So let's get started.
We're going to make a rock mold using Make-A-Mold, the liquid latex rubber molding compound from Scenic Express.
Let's make a rock mold. And I have here a piece of a rock that I picked up outside near my house, and I want to make a latex rubber mold of this rock. But first we have to prepare the rock surface, and for that I'm going to spray it with wet water. And to make the water wetter, I'm using glycol.
This is super wet. This container will make 2 gallons of wet water, and you can use it for any scenery application.
We want to make a quart of wet water. So what we need to do, we need to take the top off of this side, squeeze the bottle to fill this up. Here's a measuring cup. I'm going to fill this to the line with water. I'm going to add 2 parts of the wetting agent, and then I'm going to mix it up really good, and I'm going to put it in the Scenic Express spray mister. This is how we're going to make the rock surface wet. Okay, we have our wet water mixed. We have our rock. Now I'm going to spray the rock off to the side here because I don't want to get any on my tabletop, and I'm going to spray it so that I completely wet it. Now, why do we wet the rock surface? We wet it to make it so that the latex doesn't really stick to the rock surface. We want the latex to be removable without tearing the surface of the rock away.
Make-A-Mold is a liquid latex rubber mold compound, and to use it, you just brush it on the rock surface, allowing each layer to dry completely before you add the next one.
I should mention before I add some of this liquid latex rubber, as you can see it's white, it looks like cream. It's going to go on and it's going to dry fairly clear. And one of the things you could do to prepare your rock before you add your first layer of liquid latex rubber is to put it in an oven and get it warm, maybe 150 to 180 degree oven, and warm up the rock. And what this does, it speeds up drying and the vulcanization of the rubber, and it allows you to work a lot faster than you normally could. Now you see, I'm not really brushing this on, I'm kind of dabbing it on, and I want the first coat to be fairly thin because I want to make sure that I get the latex in all the cracks and crevices of the rock. And I don't want to produce any bubbles. And so far this is looking pretty good. I'm not producing bubbles. I'm going to keep going here until I get the whole rock surface covered. Then I'm going to put it aside and I'm going to let it dry, and then we'll come back and I'll show you a layer 2 of the liquid latex rubber. And I should mention before we go away that you can buy the latex rubber in all sizes. You can buy it in pints and quarts. If you have a lot of rocks to do, get the larger size. You won't run out in the middle of a mold making session. I want to show you what I've done here. We've put our first layer of latex rubber on our rock. And what I've done, I've taken the rock and I've put it on a Teflon cookie sheet. And I'm going to leave the rock on this Teflon cookie sheet until we finish the whole mold making process. What that will do, the big advantage is when we add extra latex around the edge here, it'll make a rim, and that rim, when we pull the mold off the rock, that rim helps us to contain the plaster that we're going to put in the mold. It also helps to strengthen the mold. So let's go. This is layer number 2, and again this is like painting. We're just going to put on a nice thick coat of latex this time because the first coat is dried. We're going to do this probably 3 or 4 more times until we have a nice thick layer of latex encapsulating the rock. And then we'll peel it off and trim the edges, and we'll have a nice rock mold that'll last for 200 or 300 castings. It'll last a long, long time. If you're not thinking of putting rocks or casting your own rocks on your railroad right at this point in time, you've got a nice mold that you can use at some point later in time. All right. There's our second layer. It's looking good. I'm going to put this aside now overnight and allow it to dry. Okay, we're ready for the third coat of liquid latex rubber on our rock mold. And this layer has dried pretty well. In fact, even the thick areas where I put on a little too much have dried perfectly. So now is the time for the third coat, and it's just more of the same. What we're looking to do here now with the third coat is to build up volume. I want a rock mold to be thick, and I want it to be durable. And what that means is that we need a good amount of rubber on the mold so that when we fill it with plaster, it won't rip or tear. So it has some volume and it has some durability. So like before, we're going to cover the mold with a nice thick layer of rubber. I'm going to take this out in my driveway and I'm going to set it on the asphalt. I'm going to let the sun hit it and I'm going to let it dry in a nice warm atmosphere. And what the warmth does, it helps to vulcanize the rubber a little bit, and I swear that it makes it stronger. So here's our layer 3. The next time we visit this rock mold, I'll be putting on a layer of surgical gauze to give it some strength and so it'll hold its shape. This is the next to last step in building our rock mold. And I've had this rock mold outside and it's pretty warm. It's been sitting in the sun so that the latex would cure. And what I'm going to do with this application of rubber is apply some gauze. And what the gauze does, it helps the rubber to hold its shape. It gives it some structural integrity. And when you put a lot of plaster in it, it'll hold together and it'll hold the plaster and the sides won't collapse on the mold. What I'm using for this is just some gauze sponges. You can use regular gauze from the drugstore or the pharmacy. And these, as you can see, look like this. They're pretty sheer. Now you can also use cheesecloth if you use the cheesecloth from a fabric store. It's very economical. You can buy a whole bolt of it for very little money if you're making a lot of molds. So what I'm doing, just like we did before, I'm going to put on a nice thick layer of latex. And we've got the whole surface covered with latex rubber. Now we want to take our gauze and just drape it over the mold. You want some overhang because you're going to trim this. I'm going to take the brush and we're going to push the gauze into the crevices of the mold so that it assumes the shape of the rock. And don't be afraid if you get a few little voids or air spaces. We're going to fill them with latex by just clopping more on. What we're trying to do is encapsulate the gauze in rubber so that it'll become part of the mold. So I'm going to keep going until this is all coated with rubber, a nice heavy coat, and then we're going to put it aside and allow it to dry again. As you can see, this is a time-consuming process, but in the end, it's well worth it because you get a mold of a rock that you can't find anywhere else, you can't buy. Okay, now we're ready for the final layer of latex rubber on our mold. I'm going to put on a fairly thick layer of rubber because I want to seal any pores that I see in the gauze covering here. All right, now we let this dry, and when we come back, we'll peel it off the rock, and I'll show you how to trim it. All right, it's time to unveil the rock mold. Now we've put on the latex, we've added the gauze, we've allowed it to dry, and I had this outside in the sun, and it almost vulcanizes the latex rubber. So you're going to see the unveiling along with me. We're going to start at a corner, and we're going to pull up the mold. And as you can see, some of the rubber has gotten under the edge of the rock, but If you go gently, you won't rip it, because this latex is pretty tough stuff. And you can see it's held all of the detail of the rock. In fact, it's, come on, baby. There we go. All right, let's get this out of the way. Move that. Okay, here's our rock mold. You can see it's captured every single nook and cranny on the original rock. Now, my job is to take this and trim it. And you can see this is all waste. This can be just thrown away. You don't want to leave it around because it'll end up sticking back to the mold because it's still pretty sticky. The latex hasn't fully vulcanized, so I'll get rid of that. Now I want to go in here, and right on these edges there are these little pieces that went underneath the rock when we put the latex on it, and I just want to trim these off. These don't really interfere with the casting process at all. So here's our rock mold. It's ready to use. All I have to now is put some super wet in it, shake it out, and pour my plaster of hydrocal in it. This will last almost forever if you keep it in a cool, dry place and you put a little bit of talcum powder on it before you put it away. You want to keep it from getting bent or folded or have it sticking back on itself. So a little bit of talcum powder in the mold before you put it away and you'll be all set. Making this rock mold also apply to almost any other modeling situation. You can use these same techniques for retaining walls, rock walls, tunnel portals, and almost anything that you can think of. If you find a good master, you can make a good mold, and then you can cast dozens or hundreds of pieces from it.
The scenery products presented in this video are all available from Scenic Express at www.scenicexpress.com.